Now let's get into your chapter. I love the name Accidental Capitalist and how Indian Americans made their mark in Silicon Valley. And you've seen the rise of Silicon Valley, or rather, I wouldn't say in front because you were in it while everything was growing. You were not a spectator. You are one of those big contributors to Silicon Valley, to where it is today. So let's get into that.
Yeah, so I think, I came here, like the reason I called myself accidental, I came here because I was living in Houston, had a comfortable job. I went for some training, and the consultant looks at my background and says, "You have an MBA, you use computers. What are you doing here in Houston? Go to Silicon Valley," right? But easier said than done. This is 1982, okay? There's no internet, there's no LinkedIn, there's no Facebook, there's no cell phones. How the heck do you sit in Houston and go, yeah, I'm going to go to Silicon Valley? So I had to go to the library, look at something called a microfiche. Only people older than 60 will even know what that is. You had to go through old newspapers of the Bay Area and San Francisco and try to find job listings. I mean, it was not easy. But I managed to find a few companies, sent resumes out. One of them was crazy enough to interview me on the phone first, fly me out and give me a job. So it was truly accidental. I had no plans that people have these days. Now you get a computer science degree, you go, yeah, let me go to Silicon Valley, right? in the 80s, there was no such thing as where do you go? There was, and so what happened was in the early days, in those days, there were only a few thousand of us. And most people who were in Silicon Valley at that time were hardware engineers. They would do chips. They would work at companies like Fairchild Semiconductor and National Semiconductor. Most of these companies no longer there, right? But these are the companies that created the original microchips and the computer chips and such, right? They came to work there. But then when computers moved from what we used to call mainframes, the big, expensive computers, to mini computers, that's when the software part of the Silicon Valley took off, right? Because now you needed to write software. You needed to write applications for business. You needed to write applications for accounting, for different activities. And that's when the Indians, moved from the hardware kind of architecture and writing to writing software, right? So that was a big move, which brought more people to look at the software industry, right? To write software, to be in the software industry. Then what happened was there was a moment, which again was a catalytic moment for us, because when you look at about 1990 or so, people started saying the dreaded word was Y2K. Oh my God, in 10 years, airlines, planes will just fall out of the air. ATM machines would stop working because the year would change. And suddenly the whole world would crash. So what did it need? It needed people who had to go change and recode these old software programs that were written in languages like COBOL and Fortran. And nobody in the US really knew those languages because they were dead and gone, right? But fortunately in India, a lot of people had read up on Fortran and COBOL because they were a little decade behind, So they were able to get all these programmers to move to the Bay Area and other places to recode all these applications for Y2K, right? So that brought in a flux of H-1B visa types, right? Who came in to work on Y2K. So that brought the next generation of people, you see? Well, we contributed the solution.
Because they knew the languages in India. Yeah, they learned it there. So
and lo and behold, it was January 1, 2000, and everything worked, and everything
worked. I do remember that.
And meanwhile, people who had gotten to the software industry started becoming successful. Right. And TIE, we talked about TIE a little bit. They were one of the organizations, obviously, that were there in the 90s that branded Indian Americans as entrepreneurs. So they were able to really push forward the brand of Indians in tech at that time. And so there were successful entrepreneurs, Vinod Khosla types and others who started companies, who took companies public and became known as successful entrepreneurs, right? That led then to the Indians moving from being just entrepreneurs to becoming investors. Because once you become a successful entrepreneur and you have an exit, you have money. And with that money, what do you want to do? You want to invest in more startups because you believe in the whole ecosystem, right? So people like Vinod Khosla and others became venture capitalists now, and they started investing in tech companies. And so it was comfortable when you met other Indians, you invest in their companies, right? Because culturally, you know them and stuff. And so we got into the venture capital industry, right? Then you move forward another 10 years, companies like Microsoft and Google decide they need new CEOs, right? The founders were leaving, they needed new CEOs. And these companies look around and they're not looking for entrepreneurs. They're looking for professional managers. And they find people like Satya Nadella, Shantanu Narayan at Adobe, Sundar Pichai at Google. So now we become CEOs of these large tech companies as a completely different type of person, right? They were not entrepreneurs. They were professional managers who grew up in these companies and became CEOs because they were damn good managers, right? So we also became known as managers, right? Then you fast forward again, what has happened now is all these companies who got started in India, right, as software companies, kind of are selling to large Fortune 500 companies in the US. So they are sitting in Bangalore and Chennai and Hyderabad and Delhi going, how do I sell to the United States? Then they realize they got to move to the US. So now the next set of people who are coming in are founders of companies who started in India, moving to the US in droves because their customers are here and they got to be closer to the customer. They can go public in the US. They're getting funded by US venture capitalists now. And there's a whole host of unicorns that have moved from India to the US and are doing amazingly well, right? So you can see every 5-10 years, there's a new event, you know, a new thing happening, brings more Indians. Another thing happens, brings more people. And this virtuous cycle is still going on 40 years after I've arrived in Silicon Valley.
I feel like as if I was watching a movie, how you summed the whole journey
absolutely.
from literally few engineers in 90s. And then they're taking over the country, the nation, the world right now. And then, of course, we have big giants sitting in India doing the jobs here, outsourcing.
Exactly. And now COVID happens, and then suddenly all these companies are helping digitize more and more and more Fortune 500 companies. So these companies are thriving, hiring people, going public. So that whole cycle is happening now, where Indian entrepreneurs are taking the companies public in the US.
The US. Yeah, I had actually two close friends, that company went public in last 3 months.
Exactly. And many more to come.
Wow.
Many more to come. And, now we have about 300,000 Indians in Silicon Valley. Now it's like every street corner has an Indian restaurant, an Indian grocery store, temple, Gurdwara, all these things are all around, right? So in a mere, short 40 years, 4 decades, we came from like a few thousand people to 300,000 people, to temples, to restaurants, to stores, to everything in between, and so it's been a pretty good ride. But what I wanted to say is I don't want to be someone who's just boosting Silicon Valley and stuff. I think we do have some problems as well. I mean,
absolutely.
So, for example, we discovered that literally, I think it's like 5 to 6% of Indians live below the poverty line. Okay. Hard to imagine, but true, right? Can you imagine someone in Silicon Valley, actually an Indian, being, below the poverty line? It's here. So we got to help people in need. So that's the other thing. Is also we have the most undocumented people next to the Mexican community. So there's so many undocumented Indians living not just in Silicon Valley, but throughout the United States. And that's a huge challenge. They can't, you can't live under the radar without a visa, without documentation for a long time. So we have to deal with those.
Oh my
And then
God,
the other,
life is hell. To live in the country without a driver's license, you can't fly, you can drive. I mean, it's just
and you
can't
only
even
can use
imagine.
cash. I mean, it's a weird way to live, and we got to help those people. And then, of course, the other area that the tech community has not done well is with gender equity. So we
Mm.
have hardly any Indian American women who are in the tech workforce. So much like the American workforce, also they don't have that many women in tech. The Indian community also suffers with hardly any women in tech as managers, developers, CEOs, very, very few. So we do have a lot of problems as we look at the next decade, the next 10 years.
Next 10
We
years.
got to get people out of poverty. We got to get undocumented people to be documented. We've got to get more women into the tech workforce. So a lot of work to be done. It's not not the end of everything. Everything is great. We're happy,
Work in progress.
Work in progress, exactly.
Work
But
in
a
progress.
good trajectory. Yeah.
And also, as the book also talks about, you talk about, and we kind of know, but that changed a little bit this time, I would say, but not a lot of people know, is that Indians were not now, this is not the present time I'm talking about, but Indians in the past were not that engaged politically. Maybe they felt like it didn't affect them as much earlier, or they were just in awe, or they didn't think it was possible, they didn't see any role models. One of the areas that was, I think, missing a bit less representation in Congress and even in city council and all that, governors. And of course, philanthropy is also kind of a little bit lower from the Indians' point of view. I think they do help maybe a lot for charities in India, but maybe within the US, and you propelled both these causes a lot in last 2-3 decades.
Yeah, and this is another area that we've done some work, but more work needs to be done, because when I started in diaspora almost 10 years ago, in 2012, we said, hey, we're great. We're 1% of the population, but we have no representation in the US Congress. We're like, this is crazy. So we set a goal that, we got to get to be 1% of Congress. So we couldn't give money directly because in diaspora is a nonprofit, but the entire network as individuals wrote checks to anybody with an Indian name, Khanna, Krishnamurthy, Jayapal, Bera, and within 3 election cycles, we celebrated in Washington with a gala, with the Indian Diaspora Gala, with over 500 people. Speaker Pelosi was there. So many congressmen and senators all showed up to now recognize we're 1% of Congress. So it didn't take us that long. We had to just fund people, support people, volunteer for them, get out and vote. And fast forward in the last election in 2020, you'll be surprised there were over 300 Indian Americans who ran for office across the country. School board, city council, mayor, all over the country, right? So now, our community is getting much more into politics, into getting engaged locally, federally, and so forth. So that we feel pretty good about the work there. Philanthropy is the other area, right? Our community, the average Indian American makes $120,000 a year. The average American makes $50,000 a year. So we make so much more, 2.5 times what they make. So with that comes responsibility of giving back. Mm-hmm. And like you mentioned earlier, we do give back to India, but the whole concept of give where you live is equally important, right? If you live in Austin, you want to give to a food bank in Austin, a school in Austin. It's not necessarily sending money to India. So in diaspora has done a lot of work. We had a program, annual program called Chalo Give, mm-hmm. where the last 2 years, it's all been around COVID to help both India and the US. And we've raised over $5 million in 2 years to give to nonprofits here and to give to nonprofits in India, primarily around food, the food scarcity and stuff. So a lot more needs to be done. We hope the online program, gets the 4 million Indian Americans in this country to give back more. And so a lot more needs to be done in that area as well, locally, also to India. So yeah, so lot of work remaining to be done.
Yeah, and in fact, I don't know if you must have heard, you're in the Bay Area. TSP group, Desi Blue.
Uh-huh.
So they did humongous work in this election. They have been for a while. So they kind of wanted the Indian American voters to wake up and vote.
Mhm.
So they raised funds. They got almost 3,000 volunteers, and they kind of worked on the swing states.
Yes, yes.
And they made people go to the voting. They're like, you need to vote, you need to vote, you need to get out. And they told them about, what's going on, busted the myths, how to do mail-in ballots, and everything that there was there to propel. They did radio ads, TV ads, a lot of work. They contributed heavily, and you know how narrow margin was in all these swing states.
Yes.
So
And
I feel
also
like
the other
we
thing
have
is,
these are again one of those behind the scenes people that a lot of people don't know they are doing just behind. They know, and this time lot more Indian Americans voted.
yes, absolutely. And they also, now we have matured to a level, we have political action committees, PACs. There are two PACs of Indian origin that support Indian candidates.
Yeah,
So,
AAPI is there.
yeah, AAPI Victory Fund,
Victory Fund.
Indian American Impact Fund.
Yeah.
These all committees that
I think-
actually write checks.
That makes an impact. Thank you so much. It was so wonderful knowing your journey, the Silicon Valley, the whole 40 years of Indians, where we were, where we are today, and about the in diaspora. What a wonderful organization that you have built. And it's by, I want to tell people to definitely check it out. It's by invite only. There's huge value to it. And it also gives back to the community in many ways. You network, you meet people. And one of the ventures that they recently did is the book that we have been talking about. So definitely check out the book right here.
All right.
Right here on this thing, Kamala Harris and the Rise of Indian Americans.
Would love it if you click on the like and subscribe button below. I bring positive stories from celebrities and philanthropists from around the world, and stay updated with all things fab on my Fablife360 Instagram page. Also, if you are looking for something fun and inspiring to listen to, find my podcast Fablife360 on iTunes, Spotify, Google Podcast, or wherever you get your podcasts.